the battle of narratives, an information war. The adversaries are the same, the Russian state media and Western media outlets. They've both weaponized information for the benefit of their respective governments. So one has to navigate things rather carefully to get an accurate account of what is unfolding. Even specific battle stories are questionable. For instance, the number of casualties. Headlines in Western media say that Putin's forces are being humiliated, that they've suffered heavy casualties. Most of them are going by Ukraine's figures. They say 11,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. That is at least 22 times higher than what the Kremlin says. These wild variations also extend to accounts of destruction on both sides. Ukraine says it has destroyed more than 300 Russian tanks. Russia says it has destroyed around 900 Ukrainian tanks. Both sides say the other is lying. These differences illustrate the kind of story each side wants to offer to its own people. Ukraine wants to encourage its people through the tale of a successful resistance. Russia wants to convince its people through stories of its military gains, and neither wants to talk about the casualties in their own ranks. So which side does one really believe? Verifying their figures is a tough job. This is an armed conflict, remember. Access to combat zones is limited. There are no independent observers. So we don't know how much of the information is being filtered, modified, blocked, or concocted. Multiple storylines, multiple narratives and counter-narratives are doing the rounds. The first one is that the Ukrainians are successfully defending their land. How then did Russian troops reach the outskirts of Kiev in just 2 days? The second narrative is that Russian troops are making slow progress. How can they gauge the pace of Russia's progress with no access to Russia's battle plans? There's also a third narrative, which is essentially a moral binary. Whatever the West says is right, and anyone who does not accept this narrative is trying to undermine Ukraine's sovereignty. Now, all of these narratives can be challenged, should be challenged. In the age of social media, unfiltered information shapes opinions. What's worse, social media is not a level playing field. It is controlled by the West. I'm talking about tech giants like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google and Apple. These companies, these private companies, have openly aligned themselves with the West. They're pushing the Western narrative and restricting Russia's side of the story. And this is problematic. I will tell you why. First of all, let's tell you what they've done. They've sanctioned Russia digitally. Remember, no government sanction forced tech companies to cut ties with Russia. There was no legal or regulatory obligation. These companies just decided to take a side based on the perspective of their stakeholders. Google has barred Russian state media from monetizing content on its platforms. Apple has gone one step further. It has suspended all product sales in Russia, cut Russians off Apple Play and other services. It has also blocked RT and Sputnik from its app store everywhere outside Russia. Then we have Twitter. It is labeling all posts by the Russian state media, adding a warning of sorts on pro-Russian stories. Then we come to Meta, the parent company of Facebook. It has left its contemporaries way behind. I'll show you a report. It was released on Friday. It says Facebook and Instagram will allow posts calling for violence against Russians and their president Vladimir Putin. Isn't that criminal? Won't this promote hate? Won't this incite hostility against all Russians? These tech giants are overstepping their purpose, deciding when it's okay to call for violence and when it's not. And this sets a wrong precedent. It also raises strategic questions for other countries. What if America were the aggressor in this conflict? What if the US had invaded another country, which they have in the past? Would these tech giants have done the same? Look at this map now. It shows all the countries that the United States has either invaded or been militarily involved in. Do you know how many there are? The US has invaded or fought in at least 84 of the 193 countries recognized by the United Nations. And none of this, none of what I've just told you, justifies Russia's actions. The invasion is wrong and criminal, no two ways about it. What I want to underline here is the hypocrisy of American institutions, the selective approach of big tech. In 2021, 3 American rights groups released a report. It said that instead of staying neutral, big tech made huge profits from America's war on terror, especially Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. They were awarded $44.5 billion in contracts, $44.5 billion, from the Pentagon and the US Department of Homeland Security. What were these contracts about? Aiding the US military in its operations, providing them with digital tools that can be used in wars. What kind of tools? Crucial databases, cloud computing services, surveillance, drone technology, even pushing narratives. The report says that Facebook alone sold $350,000 worth of advertising to promote America's federally funded extremism watch. It covers stories on violent extremism trends in Islamic nations. Facebook helped this government-owned platform promote these stories. And this was just one contract. This report says that there were hundreds of other contracts and subcontracts that were awarded to American tech giants, yet to be made public. Just to be clear, we're talking about platforms that have a direct line to the hearts and minds of billions of people the world over. 2.7 billion people use Facebook daily. 206 million people use Twitter daily. YouTube has 122 million daily active users. Imagine the kind of reach and potential big tech has in manipulating global opinion about America's actions, in controlling conversations about a conflict America is involved in. Things get murkier when you look at who's running these platforms. A report by another US rights group says that hundreds of former US government officials are currently serving in key positions at big tech companies. This includes officials from the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security and Justice, the National Security Agency, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Jared Cohen. He was a policy planner at the US State Department. He currently runs Jigsaw, a technology incubator created by Google to develop counter-terrorism tools for social media platforms. This is 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗍𝗍𝗍. He worked at the FBI for 20 years. He's currently the director of security at Amazon Web Services. This is Joseph D. Rozek. He worked at the Department of Defense. He now works at Microsoft, where he specializes in quote-unquote information sharing. And these are just a few names. There are many, many more. Reports say there's a revolving door of sorts between big tech and US government agencies, countless security officials and policymakers pigeonholing information to suit American interests. They say whoever controls the flow of information controls the world. There could be no better description of what's happening right now. Russia is the aggressor in the conflict in Ukraine, yes, but the West's monopoly on information flow is making things complex. We cannot take every story on face value. We cannot confuse visibility with transparency. Not until the gatekeepers of the world's information keep global interests above their own.
Is corrupt. If you doubt this, look at our corrupt courts and law enforcement. Corrupt regulators, corporate complicity with government corruption, power-hungry individuals and alliances, greedy political attitudes, rampant partisan jealousy, growing self-indulgence, secrecy, possible pedophiles in high-level positions, cruel drug enforcement, and deceit in every aspect of our government. Now, what does a corrupt government create? Well, it creates fear in the populace. We have a fear for our future. We have increasing economic instability. We have a fear of war, EMPs, biological contaminants, terrorist attacks, collapse of Social Security, unemployment, fear now that the Russians are coming, people being suicided and tortured, and fear for the loss of our very freedom and privacy. What does fear create? Well, it creates social discord. We have a clash over everything, over gun owners and non-owners, clash over immigration, abortion, racial conflict, religious conflict, environmental conflict, everything. And what does conflict create? It creates deteriorating conditions for life. We have poor education and even worse health care. We have national debt that's monumental. We have urban deterioration and poverty, homelessness, declining marriages, questionable foods, government spying on us, police brutality, brutality in prisons, brutal laws and regulations, theft through taxation, forced vaccinations, loss of farm and ranch lands. And what does the government do? It is indifferent. We are a nation in chaos, and yet we are lulled at every turn by government propaganda, by the press and television, by our mutual assurances on social media, by our mental escapes, by our own apathy. Wake up, America.
From my experience in the military with a top secret clearance, working in counterterrorism, working in psychological operations, working in the State Department, working in a presidential administration, and working in a defense contractor who is very familiar with the CIA. And what we see, if we just look at the facts and the evidence, is this trauma-based mind control that's been existing in the United States and Europe since September 11th, 2001 is just simply metastasized and evolved into different messages, different enemies, with a single agenda of reforming the entire Middle East, which is part of a Israeli long-term policy of expanding itself. We really know there is no threat, there is no enemy. This is just a game, this is a ploy, this is part of a smoke and mirror charade. This is a psychological operation that France is very well known and familiar with, and the CIA is very well known and familiar with, and Mossad is very well known and familiar with. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So we've seen history proves that the United States being supposedly attacked on September 11, 2001, was really a false flag, which is conducted by Israeli Mossad operations in tandem with CIA operations and involving Saudi Arabian participation for a larger neoconservative agenda of replacing the governments in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Lebanon, and eventually Iran.
People in Europe need to understand that there is a war that is becoming global, that is being waged against civilian populations in particular. It is a form of neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism which aims to divide and conquer European and Middle Eastern and African and the world's population, for that matter, and to make them submit to a global order that does not serve the interests of most of the people on this planet, but that does serve the interests of a very few ruling elite, a very small, tiny, and particularly tyrannical ruling elite. There is a war that is being waged using proxy groups, terrorist proxy groups, and they are being used against nation states who are resisting US and Israeli hegemony. One of the tools which the mass media uses to discredit any kind of rational questioning of the established order, and I think you're going to see a crackdown on so-called conspiracy theorists and websites that actually publish rational and honest analysis of what is happening. So you're going to see more of that type of intellectual terrorism. The only people who are going to actually benefit from this are the war contractors, the military-industrial media intelligence complex. And this is one of the key contemporary strategies of US imperialism. You use the consequences of globalization as further tools to further globalization.
Allen Dulles was a massive traitor who single-handedly saved Nazism and promoted fascism in Japan and Italy and Germany, brought the Nazi Hydra to the United States, helped the Nazis move their empire to Argentina and all of their gold and so forth. So what we have in the United States today is financial, religious, and ideological traitors. Germany has been a vassal state of the United States since World War II, and Angela Merkel is one of the people that has been funded and promoted by the United States for a very long time. And she came out of East Germany. It's basically, we're destabilizing the world, we're creating massive amounts of fear, and we're spending all of our money on surveillance and control. The ultra elite, which certainly leans toward neo-Nazi and even satanic influences, they think of us as expendable farm animals. We're nothing to them. And they basically see profit from war as good. And they even like disease because the CDC is a massive scam. Most of these vaccines and most of these pharmaceuticals that we're pushing off and most of the stuff that we sell on supermarket shelves is just plain poison, but it's profitable poison. So we're treated as a money machine. We cannot trust the U.S. government.
Everything coming out of the government is distorted in one form or another, not really coming and being honest with anybody in the public anymore. You can't trust them at all. And you cannot, even the government, inside the government, they can't even trust what the intelligence agencies are telling them or what their law enforcement agencies are telling them anymore. They can't. They're distorting what's being presented in the courts of law. I mean, they're just destroying all our founding principles.
these days, it's hard to believe anything that our leaders tell us, because they've lied about COVID, they lied about Russia collusion, they lied about the Ukraine impeachment trial, and there's so much more going on in Ukraine that nobody is talking about. You see such dishonesty when it comes to the history of Ukraine. You see dishonesty when it comes to the 𝗖𝗍𝗶𝗱𝗶𝗴𝗲 battalion, which is funded by the US and NATO. I mean, you can find pictures of them online holding up the NATO flag and the swastika at the same time. Their own emblem contains the black sun of the occult, which was a Nazi SS emblem. And it also contains the sideways, lightning insignia of the SS. I mean, this is on throughout the Ukrainian military. You can see that black sun of the occult on their body armor, even on the female soldiers who are paraded in front of the world as being, such an example of Ukraine's independence and spirit and nobility. Even they are wearing the black sun of the occult. And, the White House wants you to believe, well, this doesn't matter, it's just a small number of troops. It's not true. The 𝗖𝗍𝗶𝗱𝗃 battalion has been murdering its way through eastern Ukraine.
Yeah.
We don't want to admit this. This was why Crimea voted for independence. This is why Crimea wanted to be with Russia. Because we in the media, in the Western media and in the West, won't acknowledge the reality of what's gone on. Western Ukraine backed the Nazis. It was a headquarters for the Nazi SS. The CIA under Alan Dulles actually gave immunity from prosecution to the Nazis of Ukraine from the Nuremberg trials. So there's a long history of the United States and our intelligence agencies funding and arming Nazis in Ukraine. These are not like new neo-Nazi groups that sprung up. These are the actual Nazis from the Second World War, who, if you go back to the Nuremberg trials, said that they were planning for a 1,000-year Reich. And so you have to really wonder, as you look at this, when you know that the CIA sponsored the color revolution in Ukraine in 2013 and 14, that they selected Ukraine's leaders, go to Victoria Nuland's leaked phone conversation where she and the US ambassador are deciding who can lead Ukraine. I mean, there's as much interference here as you could possibly imagine before you even get to Hunter Biden, Nancy Pelosi, John Kerry, and Mitt Romney, and all of their children who are employed, who earn millions from Ukrainian gas companies.
Yeah, you are pointing, pardon me, to a real credibility crisis for our leaders. I want to let Karen Turk jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the fact that President Zelensky is Jewish, and I don't know exactly how this factors in, but there's some very interesting points in what you're saying. And looking at this, you could think it's political theatrics. You made a very good point at the beginning that you think that Putin is in control. And I actually want to play something that Jen Psaki said, because it seems that the White House is actually echoing that sentiment. Watch this.
Well, the end game is really a question for President Putin. We have completely crushed his economy. We have provided military assistance, humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainians, enabling them to fight back for far longer than the Russian leadership anticipated. And again, he has to determine what the path forward looks like for him. Thanks, everyone.
He's determining what this looks like, and I think that's a lot of what you said, Laura. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, what you just watched.
What troubles me about the moment that we're in is that we have such a selective and a narrow reading of history. President Zelensky may be Jewish, but he's not the only one in this who suffered during the Second World War, whose ancestors suffered, right? I mean, look at Putin. How many relatives did he lose in the siege of St. Petersburg? People don't know their history. They don't know what made Vladimir Putin. And I'm not I'm not defending him. I don't need to defend Vladimir Putin. My job as a journalist is to try to understand what is the truth here. I don't like being lied to. And we're being lied to on an epic scale. When we're told your only choice is you have to be 100% with Zelensky, who's a puppet, who you can find on the internet in black stilettos and leather pants, with shirtless, doing a spoof Dancing with the Stars kind of entertainment video. That's a mock of a Ukrainian group that does this kind of satanic occult type of music video. And I mean, Zelensky was selected. like so many of our leaders. And honestly, with big tech and with election fraud these days, we don't know how many leaders all around the world have been selected for us and weren't actually voted in. But what we do know is that there are increasing problems with technology and the digitization of our world. Because look at what's happening with COVID. Look at what has happened globally. We are fighting the same battles all over the world. To pretend that this war is about Russia and Ukraine is just a barefaced lie. If Putin has been warning for 15 years that he is not going to stand by while the globalists take over the world, build bioweapons facilities and whatever else they're doing in Ukraine, Ukrainian oligarchs. Ukraine has been a center of money laundering for, you know, many of the leaders in this country. For how long? Billions of US dollars have been laundered through Ukraine, and we say nothing about it. These are our tax dollars. I mean, before the impeachment trial, had you ever heard of anyone in the United States, I mean, us bringing in foreign governments to the White House for anti-corruption training? I mean, does nobody question these things? Why do we not question them? We have an idiot like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who goes at the impeachment trial and sits there as a lieutenant colonel. He didn't even make colonel. And he's telling the president of the United States what his policy should be. You have a traitor in the form of Maria Yovanovitch, who was Obama's ambassador, who's telling Ukrainian government officials, don't listen to the will of the American people. Don't listen to the election results. We are the true leaders of America. I mean, and then people object when the woman isn't even fired. She's given a cushy job for life at Georgetown University at the expense of the U.S. taxpayer. And we're told that the president of the United States cannot say to his foreign counterparts, you know, that we want you to look into something. But Joe Biden, he can withhold as much aid as he wants to. I mean, there's so much hypocrisy and dishonesty here. And Ukraine is at the center of it all. Go back to Russia collusion. Go to Alexandra Chalupa. Go to Eric Karamella, the whistleblower who went to work for Adam Schiff, who wasn't really a whistleblower, and all those corrupt people in the deep state. And you know what? The deep state isn't a theory. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's an actual deep state. Look up the SES, the Senior Executive Service, because when that bureaucracy was ushered into law in the United States of America, that's when we got a bunch of unelected bureaucrats pulling the strings behind the scenes. And these are the people that keep lying to us.
What happened is the United States and European Union mobilized this virulent nationalist group out of Lvov in western Ukraine, among whom were these neo-Nazis who worship Stepan Bandera and the Banderista movement, which was a pro-Nazi Ukrainian national movement, carried out a resistance in that area for decades. These guys came in and took over Maidan, violently overthrew the legitimate president of Ukraine, and then imposed themselves through force of violence into the Ukrainian body politic. To give you an example of how powerful they are, when Poroshenko, who was the president before Zelensky, negotiated the Minsk Accords in 2014, 2015, you know, he agreed that all they had to do is give a special autonomous situation to their status to the Donetsk and Lugansk, and they would stay part of Ukraine. He agreed with Germany and France. Then he came back and the neo-Nazis said, you try to implement that, we'll kill you. Americans get upset with a bunch of rioters taking the capital and then leaving the same day. I get upset about it. I'm not happy about it. But it ain't an insurrection. An insurrection is what happened in Ukraine. It's happening every day. Zelensky was told he was elected to be the president who brought peace. If you remember, Zelensky toured the front line because they were supposed to disarm. And he went up to the Azov battalion and he said, disarm. And they laughed at him, kicked him out. He said, I'm the president of Ukraine. They said, shut up, we'll slap you. He had to leave. And he was told, if you sign Minsk, we will hang you by the neck until dead. That's the control these people have. And they've done it in the military. These people should have been disbanded, arrested, shot. Instead, the military absorbed them and then promoted their officers throughout the ranks so that there's neo-Nazis everywhere. And the biggest embarrassment of all is when British, American, and Canadian troops go to Ukraine to train that military and NATO tactics, NATO equipment. The photographs show that they're training the Azov battalion because those were the first units Ukrainian military brought forward for training. We trained Nazis.
It seemed like an odd way to spend a Saturday, watching the blood sports at a festival for far-right extremists. This was the summer of 2019, and I'd gone to Ukraine to learn more about these groups. From the crowds, one thing seemed pretty clear about them. They weren't bothered by the fact that this event was organized by the 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗱𝗍 movement, a far-right group that has increasingly been linked to violence around the world.
The shooter is linked to a 74-page manifesto filled with white supremacist rhetoric.
FBI agents say he expressed a desire to travel to Ukraine to fight with a far-right paramilitary group.
At least one member of an American hate group also trained in Ukraine with 𝗖𝗆𝗍𝗱𝗱𝗍𝗏 Battalion.
According to the FBI, domestic terrorists killed 39 people in fiscal year 2019, making it the most deadly year for domestic terrorism since the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing.
The threat of white nationalism has evolved since Oklahoma City, where a domestic terrorist used a truck bomb to kill at least 168 people. Police don't tend to see such terrorists as lone wolves acting in isolation anymore. It's become clear to law enforcement that these attackers often have links to a global network, one with common goals and a shared ideology.
We are looking very hard at white supremacists or neo-Nazis here, connecting through social media online with like-minded individuals overseas, and in some cases actually traveling overseas to train.
Over the last few years, experts in violent extremism have grown especially alarmed about the 𝗧𝗍𝗱𝗱𝗍𝗏 movement. The group emerged from the revolution that swept across Ukraine in 2014, and it has gotten a lot stronger amid the ongoing war with pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. The fighting in that region has become kind of ideal breeding ground for militias like 𝗧𝗍𝗱. At their public events, one thing that surprised me was how many Ukrainians tend to see 𝗧𝗍𝗱 not as militants or extremists, but as war heroes. In Kyiv, the capital, I watched an Independence Day parade where veterans of the 𝗧𝗍𝗱 battalion marched alongside other volunteer militias, surrounded by cheering crowds, who thanked them for defending Ukraine against Russia. But even at the march, there were signs of the far-right ideology that's so common inside 𝗧𝗍𝗱. The symbols on their flags have been especially controversial. 𝗧𝗍𝗱 says it combines the letters I and N for idea of nation, but extremism experts see it as an emblem of Nazism.
The official symbol of 𝗧𝗍, it's a version of 𝗖𝘆𝗆𝗍𝗱. It was one of the symbols of one of SS division during the World War II. It is one of more or less usual symbols for neo-Nazi groups all over the world.
And it's not just about their symbols. When it was founded in 2014, 𝗧𝗍𝗱 drew many of its commanders and recruits from Ukraine's most notorious far-right groups, including outright neo-Nazis.
We basically recruited everyone who could hold weapons in their hand when Ukrainian state was paralyzed and the defense of Ukrainian state was totally in the hand of Ukrainian volunteers. So there were many war adventurers, guys who believed that they are on kind of ideological tour to save maybe the future of the West and so on and so forth.
So the future of the white race?
Or, yes, yes.
𝗧𝗍𝗱𝗱𝗍𝗏's paramilitary wing is now a major fighting force, with its own bases and training grounds near the front lines of the war against pro-Russian forces.
Друг румын. Я командир 2-ї роти 2-го батальйону оперативного призначення. В 𝗧𝗍𝗱 с 2014 года служу, продолжаю служить и буду служить до пенсии. 𝗧𝗍𝗱 в этом районе стоит на рубежах, которые указаны у нас на карте. Отсюда мы не даем продвигаться противнику в нашем направлении и захватывать территории наши в дальнейшем. То бишь стоим на оборонительных рубежах.
Расскажи о подготовке 𝗧𝗍𝗱 к этому выезду. Чем мы занимались до этого выезда?
До этого выезда, чем мы занимались до этого выезда? До этого выезда мы занимались подготовкой и так далее, потому как не выходили давно на передовую. Но в этот раз нас взяли в 30-ю бригаду, прикомандировали к Збройным силам, и мы проходили слаживание на полигоне в Гончаровске. Вот, чтобы войти в взаимодействие с бригадой 30-й и являемся у них 5-м батальоном, считаемся.
А ты можешь еще рассказать, как мы на базе подготовились, что мы тоже на базе, вот каждая...
Конечно, я же объяснил, на базе мы занимались всегда боевой подготовкой специальной на полигонах. И, собственно говоря, были и другие у нас выезда, но без такого большого масштабного выезда. Вот и все.
Насколько у Азова развязаны руки здесь?
Да, полностью, в принципе, у нас руки как бы не развязаны, руки имеется в виду, а мы можем выполнять задачи, и какие мы считаем нужными, т.д. и т.п. полностью, без особого согласования. Но если же более какая-то конкретная нужна нам вооружение, может быть тяжелым каким-то поработать, то да, мы созваниваемся и запрашиваем добро. В целом мы полностью автономны.
Хорошо. Как типа ведутся бои в соответствии с минскими протоколами? Ну, насколько это тяжело, не тяжело?
В целом мы стараемся придерживаться протоколов минских и договоренностей. Но иногда бывает, что ежели противник работает по нам с тяжелого вооружения, более 100 мм, то и мы отвечаем им точно так же.
Вот, тут похожий вопрос. Какое оружие используют против нас противник и что мы предпринимаем?
Противник использует вооружение 120-е минометы и работает с артиллерией, с крупной, то бишь и гаубицы. У них работают танки иногда. Вот, РЗСО иногда применяют очень не часто, но тем не менее. Вот, а что мы отвечаем адекватно им в ответ, точно таким же вооружением, если оно у нас есть.
Brad Galloway with the Center for Hate, Bias, and Extremism has studied the Azov Battalion. He says that while some neo-Nazi groups prefer to be discreet with their imagery, the Azov Battalion is more forthright. German news found members of the unit sporting SS symbols and swastikas, and Azov prominently places the wolf's hook and black sun, two symbols favored by the Nazis, on its crest.
Azov Battalion. The Azov Battalion is an extreme-right nationalist paramilitary organization based in Ukraine. Founded in 2014, the group promotes Ukrainian nationalism and neo-Nazism through its national militia paramilitary organization and national core political wing. It is notable for its recruitment of far-right foreign fighters from the US and Europe as well as its extensive transnational ties with other far-right organizations. In 2022, the group came to prominence again for fighting against Russian forces in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. The Azov Battalion formed in March 2014 as a volunteer brigade to fight Russian-backed separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk. The battalion's origins lie in the extreme right Patriot of Ukraine militant organization. In 2005, Andriy Bieletsky created the Kharkiv-based Patriot of Ukraine, PU, to champion white nationalist, anti-immigrant extreme right ideas in Ukraine. In November 2008, Bieletsky created the umbrella Social Nationalist Assembly, SNA, movement. The movement was a derivative of the earlier political party Social National Party of Ukraine, SNPU, which later became known as 𝗧𝗿𝗶𝗁𝗱𝗏. The SNA contained members from a collection of nationalist and extreme right groups in Ukraine which promoted a neo-Nazi ideology. The PU became the de facto armed wing of the SNA. In March 2014, following the annexation of Crimea, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense encouraged volunteer military units to mobilize a resistance campaign against Russian-backed separatists in Donbas. Volunteer military units would help fill the gap in the Ukrainian military's defenses. Bieletsky and several other Patriot of Ukraine members formed the Azov Battalion in response to this call. The group's first violent attack occurred shortly after its formation in April 2014 when fighters clashed with Russian-backed separatists in Donetsk. In June 2014, the group gained international notoriety when it helped recapture the southeastern city of Mariupol. Russian-backed forces. Approximately half of the 400 pro-Ukrainian forces who took control were from the Azov Battalion. Gaining control of Mariupol for the government in Kyiv had critical strategic implications for the larger war in Donbas. Mariupol lies on major roads from its port on the Sea of Azov in southeastern Ukraine, near the Russian border, as an access point into the rest of Ukraine. Azov's role in retaking and holding Mariupol from the separatist forces was the group's first significant victory, and earned it international credibility. During the battle for Mariupol, the group came to attention for its neo-Nazi iconography on their battlefield, including the battalion patch, which featured a wolf's angel symbol. The wolf's angel is a historical symbol of independence that was later co-opted by the German Nazi Party. Originally, Bieletsky's PU proclaimed the symbol was actually an amalgamation of the letters I and N, the idea of the nation, representing the organization's nationalist beliefs. However, the symbol is widely associated with the modern far right. Azov leaders publicly downplay or deny the group as a white supremacist or neo-Nazi organization. The Azov battalion denies the symbol's far-right associations and invokes the reasoning as the PU. However, the wolf's angel is far from Azov's only allusion to Nazi ideology. Bieletsky once stated in 2010 that it was Ukraine's national mission to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against Semite-led Untermenschen, subhumans. Furthermore, interviews with members of the battalion openly espouse neo-Nazi and white supremacist views. Many fighters hold an aspirational belief of marching on Kyiv once the war is over, and that Ukraine needs a strong dictator to come to power who could shed plenty of blood but unite the nation in their process. After months of fighting in 2014, the Azov battalion cemented its status as a core defense unit. On September 17, 2014, Ukraine designated the Azov battalion regiment status. This gave it official recognition as an auxiliary security force. In October 2014, Bieletsky left the group to participate in politics. He used his unit's victory in Mariupol to launch a successful political campaign. Bieletsky was elected to Ukrainian parliament as an independent in November 2014, and remained a member until 2019. On November 12, 2014, Ukraine designated the Azov Battalion Special Purpose Regiment status and formally integrated it into the National Guard. In December 2014, the Patriot of Ukraine formally disbanded and remaining members integrated into the Azov Battalion. Early on, the Azov Battalion was able to fund itself due to patronage support from Interior Minister of Ukraine, 𝗧𝗿𝗶𝗁𝗱𝗆. The Azov Battalion was incorporated into the Ukrainian National Guard while 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗆 was the Interior Minister. A direct relationship between 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗆 and Bieletsky predates the formation of Azov though. From 2005 to 2010, Patriot Ukraine, Bieletsky's precursor to the Azov Battalion, was active in the city of Kharkiv, where 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗆 was governor. During this time, Patriot Ukraine coordinated closely with local police and authorities, particularly in monitoring migrants and raiding kiosks, whose owners were not loyal to 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗆's government. Bieletsky, first with Patriot Ukraine and subsequently with Azov, benefited from the patronage of 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗆 for nearly a decade during 𝗧𝗿𝗆𝗆's time as governor and then as Minister of the Interior. As the Azov Battalion continued to grow, it pursued international relationships and recruitment of foreign fighters. The group was initially composed of half Eastern Ukrainians and half foreign fighters from Sweden, Spain, Italy, Canada, France, and Russia. The group later recruited from Belarus, Germany, and possibly the United States. The Saturn Center reported that between 2014 to 2019 approximately 50,000 people from 17 countries, including the United States, traveled to fight in Ukraine, although it is hard to determine how many specifically fought with Azov. Foreign fighters also reported traveling to Ukraine to join the group due to their attraction to the group's white ethno-nationalist views. The group's ability to inspire and recruit foreign fighters has contributed to Ukraine's reputation as a bastion for the far right. The Azov Battalion specifically cites its desire for American recruits to join Azov and help counter perceived pro-Kremlin narratives in the U.S. In interviews with far-right researchers, the Atomwaffen division claimed to have sent members to Ukraine to obtain battlefield experience. Members of their American Rise Above movement, RAM, have also openly publicized meetings with members of the Azov Battalion and National Corps. Robert Rondeau, leader of RAM, traveled to Kyiv and fought in mixed martial arts matches with members of the Azov Battalion in a facility owned by Azov, called the Reconquista Club. Greg Johnson, an American white nationalist author, also traveled to Kyiv to give a lecture and meet with members of the Azov. A number of Russian nationals have also joined the Azov Battalion, due to their lack of political dissent options against Putin's regime from within Russia, and the fact that Azov is a largely Russian-speaking organization. In 2015, as intermittent fighting in Donbas continued, the U.S. government placed a ban on any of its material or financial aid to Ukraine going to the Azov Battalion due to its far-right association. While the ban was lifted in 2016, Congress reinstated it again as part of a defense appropriations bill in 2018. In 2016, Olena Semeniaka, a new spokeswoman and head of Azov's International Outreach Office, embarked on a new set of efforts to grow the group's international ties. She is the principal coordinator behind Azov's vast transnational network in and around Europe. Semeniaka networked and organized events with far-right organizations and ideologues from Europe and the US since 2016. She has regularly traveled across Europe, meeting with far-right groups, including Italy's Casa Pound and Germany's National Democratic Party, largely attempting to win their support instead of Putin. Semeniaka also spoke at the Far-Right Skanser Forum in Sweden, alongside Mark Collett, a neo-Nazi activist from Britain's National Party and self-described Nazi sympathizer. Azov has also hosted members and communicated with members of several different American organizations. In 2020, 2 members of the US-based neo-Nazi group, Atomwaffen Division, were deported by the Ukrainian government after they attempted to set up a local affiliate and join the Azov Battalion. In 2016, 𝗧𝗿𝗶𝗁𝗍𝗄 partially returned to the Azov Battalion to found a far-right ultranationalist political wing called the National Corps. As part of this political wing's creation, he toned down some of his political rhetoric and white supremacist views. Olena Semeniaka became actively involved in the National Corps leadership. In 2017, Azov created an umbrella organization with other far-right groups to boost the National Corps' presence in elections. Described as a nationalist hate group by the U.S. government, National Corps barely registered in the national polls in 2019 and failed to meet the 5% threshold to obtain parliamentary seats. In 2018, the National Corps was estimated to have less than 20,000 members, and ran on a platform of re-establishing Ukraine as a nuclear power, and opposing European institutions. The National Corps also supports Azov's international recruitment, providing housing and logistical support to arriving foreign volunteers. It is difficult to know exactly how many foreign fighters have joined the Azov Battalion. A report by the Counter-Extremism Project estimates that foreign fighters with ties to right-wing extremism number in the hundreds, and cites the Azov Battalion as the key organization at the center of this recruitment. In 2017, the organization created a new street-wing faction known as the National Druzina or National Militia. The National Militia patrolled neighborhoods in small groups to, ostensibly, promote law and order. It also harassed public officials and clashed with police in January 2018. The National Militia conducted attacks against Roma and other minority targets. In February 2018, the National Militia formally announced its existence during a public assembly and torchlit march of 600 followers in Kiev. During the march, members swore allegiance to Andriy Bieletsky and their Azov Battalion. In 2019, Ukraine's Central Election Commission granted the National Militia permission to officially monitor the presidential election. Although the commission specified the group was not permitted to use force, members openly stated they were willing to take matters into their own hands to stop election fraud. Members of the Azov Battalion, the National Corps, and the National Militia appear to flow between the three branches. Since the creation of all three groups, the Azov Battalion, the National Corps, and the National Militia, collectively they are often referred to as the Azov Movement. In February 2022, the group came to prominence again during the Russian military buildup on the border with Ukraine. When Vladimir Putin announced the invasion of Ukraine, calling it a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, the Azov Battalion was thought to be one of the organizations he referred to. In response to the Russian invasion though, far-right militia leaders across Europe are posting declarations to join the fight against Russia. Members of the Azov Battalion see the invasion as an opportunity to raise their profile and gain increased political influence. Olena Semeniaka, spokeswoman for Azov, referenced Azov's role in Ukraine as an opportunity to play a big role in Ukraine's future politics. Prior to the invasion, Azov ran training for civilians in Mariupol, including medical care, survival and evacuation, and weapons training. In Kyiv, roughly 350 attended a paramilitary training event run by Azov. Azov leadership has been using the threat from the Russian military as a recruitment tool, amplifying their online recruitment resources. On February 24, Russian forces began to lay siege to the city of Mariupol. Azov fighters took up arms yet again and were one of the central defense forces in the city. Reporters also noted Azov regiments fighting against Russian forces in Kyiv and Kharkiv. In early March 2022, President Zelensky of Ukraine again announced the formation of an international legion to facilitate the arrival of pro-Ukrainian foreign fighters. In a similar call to 2014, the Ukrainian government once again encouraged territorial defense forces to mobilize and help resist the Russian invasion. As of March 6, 2022, approximately 16,000 international volunteers have estimated to have signed up, although it is difficult to estimate the number specifically joining Azov and its affiliates. Ideology and goals. Azov's founder, Andriy Bieletsky, stated it was Ukraine's mission to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against Semite-led subhumans. Bieletsky's group, Patriot Ukraine, precursor to the Azov Battalion, was characterized as a neo-Nazi and ultra-nationalist organization, and Patriot Ukraine was assimilated into Azov in 2014. Members and leaders of the Azov Battalion later denied its neo-Nazi ties despite members having swastika tattoos and patches with extreme right insignia. Olena Semeniaka, spokeswoman and head of Azov's International Outreach Office, has articulated a vision in which Azov takes over Ukraine. In remarks to the Nordic Resistance movement, Semeniaka said, "We are on the march to power and we will either have to get there by parliament or by other means." In interviews with The Guardian in 2014, members of the Azov Battalion openly commented on aspirational beliefs of marching on Kyiv when the fighting with Russian forces and separatists was over. The same interviews revealed a common view amongst Azov's members that Ukraine needs a strong dictator to come to power who could shed plenty of blood but unite the nation in the process. An instructor at an Azov-run summer camp for Ukrainian children stated that only nationalists can give something to this country, not Democrats, not liberals. Azov's political ambitions are slow and steady. Characterized as metapolitics, Azov pursues a political strategy centered around gradually shifting the mainstream closer to themselves to capture cultural power as a precondition for the capture of political power. Semeniaka has referred to this strategy in her public remarks, stating that Azov's strategy is to build cultural hegemony as a means to building political hegemony. The National Corps platform champions a Cryptocracy political system, which champions nationalism as a state's defining purpose. The wing supports a number of far-right and ultranationalist political positions as well as support for Ukraine reacquiring nuclear weapons. Russia, Israeli mercenaries teaming up with neo-Nazis in Ukraine. In Ukraine, Israeli mercenaries are actually shoulder to shoulder with the Azov militants, said spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. The 4th of May 2022. Israelis are fighting alongside Azov, a Ukrainian military battalion with neo-Nazi roots, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said on Wednesday, amid a row between Jerusalem and Moscow over the latter saying Hitler was part Jewish. "I'll say something that the politicians in Israel who are now inflating their information campaign are unlikely to want to hear," Zakharova said in an interview with Sputnik Radio. "Perhaps they will be interested. In Ukraine, Israeli mercenaries are actually shoulder to shoulder with the Azov militants. Israel is certainly aware of this," she added. "I saw a video." The Israeli Foreign Ministry declined to comment. Last week, a video of what appeared to be Israelis fighting for Ukraine appeared on social media. Speaking in accented Hebrew, a soldier thanked the government of Israel for helping us while we fight against the Russians. They also thanked Ukrainian Rabbi Moshe Sman and wished people a happy Passover. Further details about the soldiers remained unknown. About 2,000 Israelis remain in Ukraine, most of whom are Israeli-Ukrainian dual citizens, the Israeli Foreign Ministry said. Zakharova's remarks came days after Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov sparked a dispute with Israel. Asked how Russia can be fighting a war of denazification when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is Jewish, Lavrov said. "When they say what sort of denazification is this if we are Jews, well, I think that Hitler also had Jewish origins, so it means nothing. For a long time now we've been hearing the wise Jewish people say that the biggest anti-Semites are the Jews themselves," Lavrov told Italy's RT4. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, in his most explicit condemnation of a Russian official since the war began. And 𝗖𝗆𝗱𝗱𝗶𝗄 decried Lavrov's unforgivable remarks as blaming the Jews for the Holocaust, and the Foreign Ministry summoned Russian ambassador to Israel Anatoly Viktorov. The following day, the Russian Foreign Ministry said the current Israeli government supports the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv. Moscow also mentioned cooperation between Jews and Nazis such as Judenrats, Jewish councils, that reported to the Nazis, while conceding that the phenomenon was marginal. Last week, a Kremlin-linked channel on the Telegram social media app accused 10 Israelis who had worked on the Ukraine-Poland border of being mercenaries, publishing their names and passport details. The list was mostly made up of Israeli diplomats and embassy security, and included Rishon LeZion Deputy Mayor 𝗧𝗿𝗶𝗁𝗱𝗄𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Azov has been the centerpiece of Russia's efforts to paint Ukraine as a country in need of denazification. It has roughly 1,000 members, while there were 245,000 active Ukrainian military personnel at the outset of the war with Russia this year, and millions of adult males were required to remain in the country to help in the war effort. The Azov Battalion of Ukraine's National Guard grew out of a neo-Nazi group and still has extremist leadership and members. Azov uses the wolf's angel insignia used by Waffen-SS and Wehrmacht divisions during World War II. There are members of the Azov Battalion of all backgrounds, including Jewish Ukrainians, and the group has tried to recruit foreign members. Azov has been seen using the Israeli-developed Matador anti-armor platform, donated by Germany, where it was produced. Ukraine's military claims that 20,000 foreigners from 52 countries applied to join its foreign fighters unit. Ukraine's embassy in Israel invited Israelis to volunteer, but removed the Facebook post soon after. Russia has said it would not treat foreign mercenaries as lawful combatants and would deny them their rights under international humanitarian law.